Well, I'm very happy to have a very old friend, Stu Michael, with us today. Stu might be on the record as one of the worst behaved policemen in the BSAP. He had some stiff competition from chaps like Les Milne and Ed Huff, I remember, also didn't behave very well. But a man who was in the thick of the Rhodesian War really from the start to the finish. And another guy who I always marveled at his ability to laugh in the face of some very dangerous situations. Stu's always managed to see the lighter side of some tough times. So, Stu, thanks very much for being with me today, and good to chat again.
Thank you very much, Hannes. Yeah, I think we last linked up would have been in the 80s, sometime there. I think at the girls' flat in the avenues. They'll be having a beer or so. Yeah, a long time ago, 40 odd years ago, I think.
Long time. Stu, you might go down in history, you and Les, as the first two coppers to get shot up in Op Hurricane, right at the beginning of the war breaking out in the northeast of the country, in the Centenary area. Is that right?
Yeah, Hannes, I think all, both Les and I were both young whippersnappers then, as we all were, I guess. And we all had to have a turn as members of Part 2. And Les and I were in the same stick, and we were for a number of Part 2 callouts. But this particular one, which was in March 1972, and that date sticks in my mind because it was Milne's birthday. And he was going on and on about it because his parents had given him a new digital watch. It had a fancy light on it, which he was turning on and off all periods of the night. Anyway, on that particular occasion, we were based in Mount Darwin. We had a military tent, which was right opposite the Mount Darwin pub, which I think was called the 234. And it had been built, or was in the process of being built, over a swimming pool, or what had been a swimming pool. And I think it became quite a popular venue for the guys coming in and out of Mount Darwin. So that was our base, and we would be deployed from there. Basically, it was a flag showing sort of patrols, because nothing really had hotted up. Everything was pretty quiet. And one early morning, we were visited by the local special branch officer, who I think was Danny Stannard. He may have been a superintendent at that time, but I stand to be corrected there. Anyway, we bailed into, there were 5 of us, plus Danny. We bailed into a police Land Rover, grey police Land Rover. None of them had been mine-proofed or anything yet. And we jumped in the back, and off we went to wherever this report was, which had come in from the RLI, who were keeping the position under observation. So we were all pretty nervous. We weren't sure, what we were going into. No experience apart from a bit of coin training when we were in depot. Les and I were in depot together as well. And off we went, and there was lots of nervous laughter. And I remember tummies grumbling, and somebody farted in the confines of this vehicle, and then that unleashed that unleashed everybody. And I seem to recall Danny Stannard continuing the journey with his head sticking out the window. It was horrendous, man, the freaking smell. Anyway, we got to near the position and debussed, and we had to walk in, and we were going to be the stop group. And there was a small ridge just above. There was a little sort of stream, very lush vegetation, where this camp had been observed and was under observation by the RLI chaps. And we went up into position, and when we were in position, I guess our stick leader got hold of the RLI troop commander or stick leader, told him we were in position, and they initiated the contact. And I remember we were all in sight of each other in the stop line. And as soon as the firing started, or the contact started, we were able to chat to each other. And I was next to a chap, Ron Martin. And I remember the two of us saying, okay, that was an MAG, that was an FN, that was an AK, and so forth and so on. And it went on for a while. And then everything stopped, and we were instructed to sweep down into the position. And so we started moving down, and the contact started again. And I remember this one RLI fellow who is behind a tree or an anthill. He's just jumping up, double tap, and behind the anthill, jumping up, exposing himself down again. And I remember thinking, bloody hell, that he's a brave chap, man. He's putting himself, making himself very visible. Anyway, we went through the position. I think there were bits and pieces recovered. I don't recall any bodies or anything like that. We swept through the position, and they had obviously scarpered. And thereafter we left. We went back to Mount Darwin, and the RLI guys continued the follow-up. And then later in the week, we met the guys in the Mount Darwin pub, which, by the way, we spent a considerable amount of money in. In fact, I had to send a telegram from the post office back to my girlfriend at the time and ask her to send more loot. But we were spending so much money in the pub. So yeah, that was the first time, the sort of 6th, 7th of March in 72. And I think it may have been certainly from a party's point, one of the first contacts in that area.
And Stu, after that, you went back to uniform branch. Just talk us through your
Yeah. Well, I was stationed in Salisbury Central Charge Office, doing very mundane police work. Milne was with me, or I was with Milne. He was senior to me, a senior squad to me. And so we were both in charge office for a while. And next door to charge office was the information room, which eventually morphed into the control room, the B cars. So I applied for a position there. I went to do an advanced driving course, and was transferred into information room. And Les went off to, I think, Borrowdale. So he went off to Borrowdale police station. But we kept in contact, and we used to see each other quite often. And I think the two of us were arrested quite often as well by our colleagues. I seem to recall that it was the cock door that most of the trouble that we got into came from there. Yeah, so information room for a couple of years. And after 3 years, you were eligible to sit for promotion, which I did, and fortunately managed to pass. And I was promoted to section officer, and having been promoted, I was due for transfer, and I was transferred to Mableham as a suburban police station. And that's where I spent, I think, probably 2 years or so, and then got a a call from the officer commanding to pop in and see him, which I did. And he said, you need to go and see Inspector, a chap named Pete Gibson. And he wants to speak to you about a transfer. So I found out Pete Gibson, he was never in charge of dog section at one time. And Pete had just injured himself in a new unit, the SIS, Special Investigations Section, which had been the brainchild of two guys in support unit, and had been very successful. And I think eventually support unit were told, well, you won't be able to carry on with this because you've got other duties to do. Hand it back to uniform branch, which it did. Anyway, long story short, Gibson said to me, yeah, he wouldn't be able to carry on. And he had asked his blokes, it was a stick of 6, I think, who they would like to take over as their stick leader, and they mentioned me. I'd been stationed with a few of them earlier on. So I said, yeah, I'll do that. So I joined what was then SIS for a very enjoyable year or two, and served in the Manicaland area, sort of Resapi, and then a lot of work in the Hondi Valley. And yeah, a couple of incidents with SIS, which yeah was very enjoyable, and some really good guys. And Hannes, I digress, but there was at Ruda base camp where we operated from, I think there was a police reserve stick from Inyazora. And one of the guys in the stick was Hugh Balance, who's, I'm sure, at the Balance Sons, went on to do great things in the world, particularly in cricket. I think the grandson, Gary, eventually played for England.
Yes.
Anyway, Hugh Balance, we obviously met him and were discussing where we were from and families and so on and so on. And he said, yeah, he had his children, he had boys, and he had a girl, Sally yes. Balance. So one of our chaps, Ken Hock, said to Hugh, oh, really, you've got a daughter, have you? Well, as soon as I get back to Salisbury, I'll be looking her up. And Hugh Balance said to him, over my dead body, you won't go anywhere near my daughter. And as it turned out, one evening, Ken Hogg met Sally, and they hooked up and were together for a long time. Ken eventually left the police and went to join Hugh as a farm manager. Tragically, he was going home for breakfast on Hugh's farm one time, and there was I think a log across the road. He was on a motorbike, and he stopped to move it, and he got taken out. So yeah, tragically ended from what could have been a really lovely story. So yeah, so we operated in that area, and Umtali as well. We did a few ops from Umtali and Inyanga.
Stu,
lots of walking and
was this police work that you're concentrating on criminal stuff, or was it counterinsurgency, or both?
Yeah, it was. I think the idea, Hannes, was, and this came from support unit, was started by, I think, a chap named Andy Gray, and then refined by a guy named Phil Wright, who was with Les when Les was shot. When Les was shot in the arse, he may have told you that story. And it was, he was shot by one of his own guys. It wasn't in a contact or anything. But an amusing story, which I'll leave for Les to tell if you manage to get him on this program. Anyway, the thinking was that police guys had been trained perhaps a wee bit better than army guys to investigate and interrogate. And support unit was predominantly black troops. And they thought it would be a a good idea to do sort of pseudo operations using their black troops to get the information with informers and etc., and then work under the special branch guys of the area. So that was kind of the thinking. But as the war hotted up and support units were needed for more of a military role, it was handed back to uniform branch, and obviously the powers that be thought it was a good idea. So it continued, and I think there were SIS sticks, Salisbury Province, Mashonaland Province, Maribeeland. There was a couple of them, and I think it was quite successful.
Were you running informers? How were you gathering your information?
Yeah, we did with SB. The SB would give us informants to take with us. On the one occasion, the guy we had been given, a very pleasant bloke actually, and we had to handcuff him. And it was in the Hondi Valley, and he said, "I'll show you the route that is being used to come into the country." And sure enough, he took us bang onto the route, and there was a group crossing a stream. Very professionally, the guys, they were doing it properly. I sent one guy across and he took up a defensive position, then the next guy, and so they did it one at a time, and they got themselves all across, and we followed them for a while, and they'd stopped for a smoke break or a tea break, and we were able to engage them. And I'm sure the guys will remember when the contact was initiated. It was contact on the radio, so everybody else could clear the airways. And there was a reaction stick at Ruda base, and I think they were some territorials. Anyway, so whilst we were involved with contact, the K car came over. And I have to say, it was freaking frightening with this 20mm cannon blazing down, because it was very close contact. And those of you who know the Hondi Valley, it's very thick. And I was talking to the K car commander, just saying, "Okay, buddy, you're pretty close. You're going to nuke us." They said, "Turn your cap around, to show the day glow," which I didn't have. They said, "Okay, hold your map upside down," which I wasn't too keen about, because I may as well have had a neon flashing light on my head. Here I am. Anyway, so I turned this map around. I was more fear of the freaking K car than anything else. And he sort of identified where our group was and then carried on, but it was very close. And anyway, the reaction guys came in and dropped them off. And I think, as I say, it was a TF call sign, but there was a young 18-year-old, I think he had just finished his training. His first call up, he got off the chopper and he was shot and killed. So that was tragic. Otherwise, it was quite a successful contact. And as typically happens, we said, "No, get back to Ruda." So we waited for the helicopter, and they said, No, you walk back. We had to walk out whilst I think a TA call sign did a follow-up. We went back to Ruda, and then the bodies came in nets and slings. And I think there was an RLI call sign there that was in the process of being deployed into Mozambique. They had just arrived. So yeah, Hondi Valley, it's a beautiful area, man. Wow, it really is. Apart from the buffalo beans, which were everywhere, which everybody suffered from. But it was great. I actually enjoyed that. Eventually, I finished my year, and I was transferred back to uniform branch, to highway patrol. I went and I had to do another driving course. And if you remember, the highway patrol had those BMW 2.8s. That's how I went back as member in charge highway patrol in traffic. I wasn't there for too long when I got called in by the officer commanding Eric Saul and told him that I was being transferred to close security unit in the Prime Minister's office, which I didn't really want to go. I was quite enjoying myself in highway patrol, still doing part two. I was back in part two then. Anyway, I had a mate who was doing close security at the time. He said, "Stu, you'll love it." Anyway, so I went off and I met the team there and the Prime Minister's PPS, who at the time was Brian Smith. So I met Brian and he said, "Okay, this afternoon or whenever it was, I'll take you in and you'll meet the Prime Minister." And that's what happened. We went into the Prime Minister's office and Brian Smith introduced me to him. And yeah, he was interested to know what my history was. And I told him I'd been at Plumtree. Fortunately, Brian Smith had also been a Plumtree boy, so that helped. And Brian retired shortly after that, and John Snell took over as the PPS, and John was a Plumtree boy as well. So we had the Prime Minister surrounded by Plumtree boys. And eventually, I think he went down to Plumtree, the Prime Minister, to open a sports weekend. And he was made an honorary clinician. So we referred to him as a Plumtree boy as well, even though he had been at that criminal institution that Aidan Diggerdin had attended in Gwello. Yeah, so that was my start there. And there were 8 of us, but only 4 worked with the PM at a time. One would travel with him, and we rotated. One traveled with him, 2 in a backup vehicle behind him, and one chap who would go ahead and do the advance. So if, for instance, if he was going for a meeting at the Monomatapa to meet somebody there, the advance guy would go to Monomatapa just to make sure of the route, which room he was going into, who else would be there, etc., etc. He'd relay that to us. And then the PM would jump in his vehicle, and he had a Peugeot 404. It was a really normal Joe Soap vehicle. There was no fancy vehicles, no escorts. Unless it was an official function, you obeyed all the rules of the road, stopped at the traffic lights. And often he would stop at the traffic lights, a vehicle would draw up next to him, and it would be a cricketer or a rugby player or a farmer that he knew, and they'd wind down their windows and have a conversation, at the middle of whatever, Jameson Avenue and First Street or something like that. Yeah, very, very ordinary and normal. And he only ever had 4 chaps with him. I think if there was going to be a big occasion, we might have increased the team a wee bit. Some of the guys who had been on time off, bring them back in. But otherwise, it was only 4 guys. And so you rotated, you did close, you did backup, and you did advance.
Stu, who looked after Mrs. Smith? Janet.
She didn't have anybody. She just carried on as per normal. So she didn't have any close protection at all, other than at Independence at the house. There was a police guard at the main gate. Nothing really untoward. There was a police chap at the gate. He used to, make sure the gate was opened, and at night wander around the garden. I think at night there were two guys who did that, and that was really a charge office duty. So it was for the young guys who had come out of depot were in charge of us, and that was one of the duties they had, was guarding Prime Minister's residence. But from a close security point, there's only 4 guys in my time. In fact, before I got there as well, it was pretty much the same. Had a good bunch of guys, and we had some good times with him. And he had a wonderful chauffeur who came from CMED, Frank Abrams. He was with him for Yonks, and I know the Prime Minister and Mrs. Smith were very fond of him. He was a good guy. He was a good man. Often wonder what happened to Frank. Yeah, and then it was either, if it was in sort of striking distance, we would drive to venues. If it was somewhere else, Bulawayo, fly down there. And that's when Les Milne got involved, because at that time he had left uniform branch, gone to CRD, and then joined SB, and he was stationed in Bulawayo. And when he heard that the Prime Minister was coming down, and I was with him, he managed to get his request approved, and he said, I'll be the SB liaison guy in Bulawayo. So Les met us. Yeah, probably not a good thing, but it was great to see Les again. I remember, Hannes, it was the opening of the trade fair. We went down to the trade fair, and so 2 of us flew with the Prime Minister. Frank Abrams had gone down with the advance car. We had sent an advance car down there. Frank had gone down there to pick up the local CMED Mercedes for the Prime Minister. And the link man in Bulawayo was Les. So Les and I linked up, and anyway, we go to the trade fair, and the Prime Minister wants to go and see all the pavilions and stands. So we're wandering around, and he was particularly interested in the cattle. He used to love going to see the cattle. Anyway, so Les and I, were going with him. Les always tells the story that he tells everybody that Michael lost the Prime Minister at the trade fair in Bulawayo. I might have misplaced him. I might have misplaced him for a while. But the general manager of the trade fair was a chap named Basil Watts. And he had an 8mm cine camera. And Hannes, you'll know my skills with those sort of devices, and you'll know those from setting up this interview. I'm clueless. And even more so when Basil Watts came up to me and very hush-hush said, I know you gentlemen have got a very important job, but would one of you mind filming me with my 8mm camera with the Prime Minister? Yeah, no problem. And Milne was beside himself, crying with laughter, because Basil gave me the camera. So he showed me how it worked, and went into the, whatever it was, the Bulawayo Pavilion, and he was showing the Prime Minister around, and I was filming it. And Les and I often used to laugh afterwards that once the camera was handed back to Basil Watts, and if he's still alive and listening to this, I apologize, Mr. Watts. The camera was given back, and we imagined him inviting friends around for supper. And as they did in those times, would you like to look at my holiday snaps? And he would have, had a bit of one-upmanship by saying, let me show you the video of me and the Prime Minister at the trade fair, which if he did, he might have seen the Prime Minister's shoes, but he would have got, most of the shot would have been Milne, crying with laughter, leaning up against the wall of the pavilion. Yeah, it was funny for us. I don't suppose it was too funny for him.
Stu, what's that story about the BMW, the Cheetah that was misused, and the Prime Minister made inquiries?
Oh, okay. Milne's been talking. When we were in Bulawayo at Government House, and when we stayed at Government House, we were treated as VIP guests. You know, we were lowly close security guys, but we were treated as guests, and we had a valet. When the Prime Minister had lunch, or supper rather, not lunch, we had to go to supper with him. So often there would be, the president might have popped in and he'd be staying there, or one of the ministers. And so we'd go and sit down with the PM and his guests and have supper with them. So you had to behave up until that time. It was quite nerve-wracking. The major domo then was a sergeant major, and I think his name was Lovett. He ran a very, very efficient government house. I remember the waiters, and each guest had his own waiter. And before they all arrived, the waiters would line up outside the door to check that their dress was correct. Maybe a little spray here or there of Old Spice, and a peppermint was popped into the mouths to make sure everything was fresh. Anyway, on this particular occasion, we went in, and whatever the meal was, there was beet fruit. And I had the outside one, so it was a bit, you know, like a ball. And as I cut into it, it rocketed off my plate onto the beige carpet. It was a beige carpet, and I was trying to get my leg out like a hooker to get it back in, which I failed to do. But the major domo, Sergeant Major, he saw this and he went forward and he just surreptitiously sort of kicked it under the table, but it left a track mark like a slug, a purplish slug mark across this beige carpet. Bloody hell, yeah, it was quite nerve-wracking. You know, anyway, it was one of those things. And Hannes, the vehicle, we had I don't even remember those BMW Cheetahs.
Yeah.
We had a yellow one, which had a bit of pace actually. And we used that after hours. So after the Prime Minister had been tucked up in bed, and I think support unit provided the guards. They did the duties. So once everything was secured, we could go out. We could go to town and let our hair down, which we used to. And of course, Milne being stationed in Bulawayo knew all the haunts. We went in this BMW and came back whatever time, very late, and obviously too much to drink. And I'd come from highway patrol, so I fancied myself as a bit of a stunt driver. And I think I may have been showing Les the best way to do a handbrake turn at speed. Completely oblivious. Well, we were completely oblivious to the screeching and the noise and the revving engine and whatever. Anyway, we thought nothing about it. And in the morning, good morning to the Prime Minister. Morning, sir. And he'd take a walk around the gardens, see how things were going. And he said, Stu, what happened last night? What was that, sir? There was like screaming and no, sir, I'm not sure. I'll investigate it. Anyway, fortunately, nothing was said. Yeah, lots of incidents like that weren't in the regulations.
Stu, Pete Lombard tells a wonderful story about being on duty at the Prime Minister's residence in Salisbury, and apparently Janet, of an evening, she was very keen to get rid of the security guys. She just wanted her home to herself. And
Yeah.
on occasion, she would give Lombies vegetables from the garden there to take across the road to Sports Club to sell for beer money. And that was
Yeah, some of the things that the guys got up to. I think Mrs. Smith, she was wonderful. She really was. On a few occasions, some of the uniformed branch guys would fall asleep on the veranda. They had very comfortable veranda chairs. And on more than one occasion, the guys would nod off there and she would wake them up. But there was never any fuss or bother. I remember the late Jim van Dyke. Now, I must tell you a story about him as well. The late Jim van Dyke was on duty at the gate at night, and he was bored to tears. So he tried to get some shut-eye, but the frogs in the pond wouldn't let him. So I don't think the Prime Minister was in at the time. I think he was away, and there still had to be a presence at the house. And Jim went down to the pond to find the offending frog, and he drew out his 9mm P1 and shot it. And of course, as soon as there's reports of shots at the Prime Minister's house, everybody descends on it. What happened? No, nothing, sir, nothing, sir. It was Van Dyke, misbehaving.
Stu, were you around when other dignitaries visited? John Forster, other heads of state. How did that all work? Did they bring their own security?
They did. Yeah, they did, Hannes. In fact, South Africans coming into Rhodesia then, they were armed, they had their own arms, and we were allowed to be armed when we went into South Africa as well. We took our own weapons, which, by the way, we're actually better than the South Africans. We were better equipped with a variety of weapons that we were allowed. When we went to England, we weren't allowed to. Our arms were taken away from us. But South Africa, we were, and their guys, when they came in, they were as well. So there was a few occasions that they arrived. Toing and froing between the two countries, and they were nice guys. Made some good contacts with them, and I have to say that they were very supportive. The police guys, the SAP guys, very supportive and nice guys. No, they were good guys.
Stu, did you, being that close to the Prime Minister, did you see him under pressure? Did he ever talk to you about what was going on?
Hannes, no, he didn't. He didn't talk business at all. But there was one occasion, Hannes, I never heard him swear. I think the best we got out of him was damn, and nothing else. Even though when things were going wrong, he kept his composure and kept his cool. But Hannes, the one day, which for me was actually quite humbling, and I actually didn't know how to deal with it. And in hindsight, when I think back, I think, geez, I could have handled that a lot better. But during Lancaster House, when there was a lull in the conference, Smith flew back to Rhodesia to brief, I guess, his cabinet and everybody else, and I flew back with him. And I wasn't feeling too well. I had a bit of fever or whatever it was. And so I'd fallen asleep. And prior to flying, we got to the aircraft. It was an SAA, and we were flying just economy class. And it was one thing about Ian Smith was he didn't look for any of the luxuries. He was quite happy to go along with what everybody else had. He was, if I go back to his vehicle, there were Peugeot 404. That was his vehicle. It was nothing fancy at all. Anyway, flying back from London, the captain, the SAA captain, heard that he was on board, and he said, "No, this is not good enough. You must come first class." So he was upgraded to first class, and it was one of SAA's new Boeings, which was an upstairs one. Caesar was luxury. So I obviously went in with him into the first class. He had his own seat, and I was sitting just in front of him. Anyway, after supper, whatever, I must have nodded off, because the next thing he was shaking me. I wake up, "Sorry, sir, no problem." And he sat down next to me, and he said to me, and these are his exact words, Hannes. He said to me, "Stu, do you, as a young Rhodesian, do you think we are doing the right thing?" Well, Hannes, I mumbled whatever I mumbled, "Yes, absolutely, sir. I'm sure all the young Rhodesian guys are 100% behind you." And he just sort of nodded and got up and walked away. And as I say, when I think about this many years afterwards, maybe I should have said a bit more, something a little bit more sensible than I did. But that was an indication that, he was obviously worried about this sort of thing. And he wanted to canvass opinion as to, what young Rhodesians felt about it. So yeah, that was quite something.
Stu, did you go to the farm with him? I know he used to like going back to...
Yeah. Often, Hannes, that was his getaway. So yeah, we often used to go down to the farm. I think Selukwe Police Reserve provided the armed security. And so yeah, we used to go down with him, and we stayed in a hotel in Selukwe, and we'd drive out during the day and then spend the day with him. And he loved it. He loved his cattle. His family often used to come down with him. And he loved indigenous trees. And so often we would be taking some of the hardwoods from the Lowveld or from the valley, which weren't particularly suited for the Selukwe climate, which, as you know, gets freaking cold. But he did. He had these planted all around the farm, and when he walked around, he would say, "I planted this on such and such a date, and this one I got from national parks at Mana Pools," or something like that. And he had a lot of those, and very keen with planting stuff, and his cattle as well. He loved his cattle. He had a his manager, I think, was a guy named Warwick Southey was his manager there. So yeah, I used to go and spend time with his cattle and look at his cattle, and we used to go down with him. And Hannes, we were allowed to wear those freaking dreadful safari suits. Do you remember those safari suits which came in pale blue or beige, and you and you used to wear matching socks with them, which had stripes, either dark blue stripes or a browny green red stripe for your beige safari suits, and the bunny jacket, and we used to wear those. And I remember my daughter saying to me, Dad, no, don't, you can't do this. Anyway, we wore them because they were good, and the bunny jacket, you could wear a weapon underneath them without it being seen. On the one occasion at Gwenora on his farm, I was sitting on the rails while he was doing whatever the cattle's, and then he said, "Right, time for tea." So we all used to traipse back to the house for tea on the veranda, And he insisted on pouring tea for everybody. So he would, how many sugars do you want? Do you want milk? And then he'd bring you the cup and a slice of cake or whatever it was. It was like a ritual. And yeah, Frank Abrams, his chauffeur, used to come and join that. Anyway, on the one occasion we were sitting, I jumped off the rail to go back with him. And his daughter was there, Jean was there. And we went back on the veranda, we were sitting on the veranda, and the next thing, his head supervisor arrived, holding in his fingers a very smelly and dirty cow dung splattered weapon. And he said to the PM, Mr. Smith, sir, I found this. And the PM looked at it, and then he immediately looked at his daughter, and he said, Jean, I've told you, if I've told you once, I've told you 100 times, look after these weapons. You can't just be irresponsible. And so, Jean, Dad, it's not mine, Dad. It's not mine. And now I'm feeling my bunny jacket. And of course, it wasn't there. It was mine. As I jumped off the rails, it had come out of its holster and landed in a cow pat or something like that. Anyway, fortunately, Jean, sort of kept mum. No fingers pointed at us, and I managed to retrieve it and clean it up.
Did you? I know he used to enjoy going to cricket and rugby. Did you go to sports events with him? And what was the play?
I did.
In crowds like that.
No, it was great, Hannes. I must tell you, the late Roy Bennett, who I knew well. We went to, it was at the police ground, and Rhodesia were playing one of the provincial sides. And whenever he could, the PM would go and watch. And of course, we would go with him as well.
Was this cricket or rugby?
Rugby.
Okay, yeah.
But he used to go both. He used to do both, but this particular one was rugby. And of course, as you know, because you would have been involved as well, the beers flowed whilst you were watching the game, and the better Rhodesia did, the more beers that you were able to drink. Anyway, the game finished. I think we may have gone up to the change rooms. The PM might have had a drink. He actually didn't drink very much. He may have had the odd beer, but he wasn't a drinker at all. They had a drink with the guys, said well done to them, and we were leaving, and Bennett saw me. And I was on close that particular day, so I was right next to the Prime Minister, and Bennett saw me, and he just shouted out, Michael, and ran and just jumped on me. and I was, it was like this pesky fly on me, and the Prime Minister was thinking, okay, what's going on here? That was Bennett. Yeah, me trying to say to him, Roy, no,
Stu, yeah.
And then, so there, in Rhodesia, there was a lot. At Lancaster House, every weekend when there was no sittings at Lancaster House, he would go to a sports event. And it was rugby. The All Blacks were in town, so we managed to watch the All Blacks. He went in, he was asked to pop into their change room afterwards. These freaking huge All Blacks in various stages of undress with their schlongs, coming across to shake hands with them. He loved it. He loved it, greeting them. We went to a lot of football matches. I remember going to Arsenal. So it was 79. Arsenal were the holders of the FA Cup. So we watched Arsenal playing Wolverhampton. And afterwards, he was invited to the Arsenal VIP box, the director's box, which is luxurious. So he went up to meet the directors there. And Sir Stanley Matthews was there.
Oh, wow.
So it was great. I was able to meet him, and I managed to get his autograph as well, and hold the FA Cup. Actually, they said to me, "Would you like to hold the FA Cup?" Which I did, which my mum was very proud of because she was an Arsenal supporter. Yeah, and rugby, a couple of football matches that we went to see. No, it was, and he was well received by the crowds, particularly in South Africa. At all the sporting events in South Africa, the announcer would say the Prime Minister of Rhodesia is here, and he'd more often than not get a standing ovation, perhaps bigger than the South African boss.
Yeah.
So, but he was a very approachable guy, Hannes. You know, from when he used to go for haircuts, he would, his social secretary, Barbara Stapleford, I think, she would say, okay, the PM wants to go for a haircut. And then she would give us the money for the haircut. She had petty cash. And he would walk down from the office. He'd, you know, walk down to the barber, which was near the Anglican Cathedral.
Oh, yeah.
The little barber shop there. So he'd walk down there, and then, of course, there are lots of people wandering around, and they'd come up to him, black and white, shake hands with him, have a chat with him, and then he'd have his haircut, have a chat to the barber, as guys do, you know, the sort of gossip shop, and then wander back to the office. When, if you recall, when Andrew Young, who was the American ambassador to the United Nations, who was quite involved in trying to find a settlement, he came out, I think, with Cyrus Vance.
Yes, and David Owen.
The meeting, yeah, and the meeting was on Enterprise Road and Glenara Avenue, I think. There was the PTC Training Center, I think it was, quite an imposing building, and that's where it was held. And the Americans, they brought up this massive armored vehicle from Pretoria, and all their bodyguards and security guys. And they talked into their watches and into the lapels, and they talked into their sleeves, and yeah, they were very, very visible and out there. I think we were a lot more low key and conservative, really. Anyway, they arrived in this vehicle, picked their VIPs up at the airport, and there was some municipal work going on the road back, on the airport road going back. And their advanced team had those municipal repair guys removed. They weren't allowed to be there when they came past because they were seen as a potential threat. Anyway, they arrived at this training center with their guys, a couple of their guys standing on the running boards of the vehicles, you know, with the sunglasses and da-da-da-da. And the vehicle came in, I don't know, 20 kilometers an hour or something. And I suspect that the guy hanging on and standing on the running board had forgotten Newton's laws of motion. So when he jumped off the vehicle, yeah, it was difficult for him to immediately do 25 kilometers an hour. So he leapt off. And he kept running, and I don't know how far he had to run before he had gained his composure, and then slunk back like a whipped hunting dog. Yeah, he did. Yeah, they were very like that.
Stu, were you around then when David Owen, the British Foreign Secretary, visited?
I did, Hannes. That was great because, yeah, you know, he was a bit of one of those fair-weathered friend type characters, shaking everybody's hand. I think he was shaking the waiter's hand as well at one time. Yeah, very charming, you know, a typical Brit diplomat. He really was.
It treated Ian Smith with almost contempt.
Dismissive, yeah, very dismissive. But, you know, stuff like that, I think just went straight over Smith's head. He wasn't fussed about it.
Well,
If he was,
he did say, actually, it's quite interesting that when he was dealing with Cyrus Vance, who was the American Foreign Secretary, Secretary of State, and Andrew Young and David Owen, how well-mannered Young and Vance were. They just were very well-mannered people, whereas David Owen would stand there with his hands in his pockets and talk to him. You know, he almost out of his way to be disrespectful, whereas the Americans, although they were politically at you know, at poles apart, I suppose, they were still very well-mannered.
Yeah, I think a lot of those, and it was particularly the conservatives, actually, of their ministers, you know, like when the governor came and Anthony Duff, they really believed they were a cut above us mere mortals. They really did. And if we, at the end of Smith's period in office, and I got moved to Government House when Soames was there, and whenever I traveled with him in the vehicle and he had someone in the vehicle with him, and it was normally Duff, they would speak in French, but always wished that I actually spoke it, whatever they were getting up to. But they obviously did it on purpose, yeah.
Stu, how did you find people like Soames and Duff? Just arrogant?
Yeah, Hannes, on the one occasion, Soames was keen to shoot a buffalo. So it was arranged for him, and he was going to shoot it up in Kariba. And I think the National Parks chap was Ron Van Heerden.
Yes.
He was the provincial head honcho, Mashonaland North. I think he was, but I can't be sure.
Yeah.
And anyway, so Soames was told, this is the weapon you are going to use, but you need to be familiar with it. So you need to go and zero it. So we drove out to Sonoya, to one of the hensman's farms, and they had lots of impala running around, very tame. I think you could probably go up and grab them by hand. Anyway, Soames was going to shoot an impala just to get familiar with his weapon. He took a dead rest on the Land Rover door and shot the impala's leg off. And so one of our guys, I think it was Rob Nimmo, had to go and issue the coup de grace with his 9mm, with his P1. It was the wonderful shot of Soames. He was going to shoot a buffalo, and we were just hoping he wasn't going to shoot a buffalo, just shoot its leg off. So off we went to Kariba. And honestly, Hannes, it must have been going back to the days in the 1920s, 1930s, like this safari had been set up. Anyway, so I went out with Soames and Ron Van Heerden, who was the guide, and I had a light-colored shirt on, which pissed Soames off. He wasn't happy. Anyway, he didn't get his buffalo, and when he came back, his entourage said to him, "How did it go, Gov?" They used to call him Gov. Yeah, he said, "No, it's one of the security chaps had a white shirt on and it spooked the buffalo." I was actually quite happy that I did have a white shirt on, because I wasn't, although we had our FNs with us. So yeah, that was Kariba. Hannes, with that party was Andrew Parker Bowles, the Colonel Parker Bowles.
Yes.
He was there with his wife, Camilla, and they were married at the time before they divorced, and she obviously married Prince Charles. And they went out on a police launch. There was a small tender boat as well that was dragged behind. So I went out, and I was with Paul Triggle. Paul and I were the two senior guys, so we were on the launch with them. We had our swimming costumes on. They all had their cozies. And the thinking was that these guys are going to jump into the water and get into trouble. You know, we're going to have to do something about it. And they were pissing it up on the boat. We're drinking gin and wine or whatever. And Camilla, who actually is a very nice lady, quite a feisty girl.
Yeah.
She had a bikini on, and she actually had a nice figure, Hannes. So Paul and I might have been doing a bit of perving. Anyway, she leant over the boat to splash some water up into, you know, she was obviously a bit hot. And her husband saw her leaning over, and I suppose he was a bit pissed, and he pushed her into the water. Anyway, she came up. She was freaking livid. And let me tell you, Hannes, if you think you can swear like a trooper, then you need to think again. She was a champion, and she let her husband have it, both barrels, properly. Yeah, calling him all sorts of names, which Paul and I think Paul and I just jumped overboard and swam to the bottom of Kariba because, you know, we were hearing this. Anyway, she got her revenge and she pushed him on. They called him Andy Pandy. This is how they were speaking to each other. Oh, Andy Pandy. Oh, Andy Pandy, you poor thing. Anyway, Andy Pandy got pushed in and he grazed his shins on one of the outboard motors. I think on the leg of the motor, he grazed his leg. And he had either sinuses or something like that. And he came up blowing snot and, you know, that she had got her revenge. And the governor was sitting there going, oh, poor Andy Pandy. Give him a hand. Give Andy Pandy a hand. So we dragged this drowned rat back into the boat. And in Soames, you know, he was a red color to start with. And sitting on the lake in the Kariba sun, he was getting redder and redder and redder. And his wife obviously said to him, and of course his wife was Winston Churchill's youngest daughter, Mary. And she said to him, you know, you need to put your hat on. And he had one of those blue floppy hats, those cricket type hats. And but they couldn't find it. So they were all looking around the boat. Where's Hattie? They were calling it Hattie. Everything was Hattie, Andy Pandy. Jesus. Honestly, I thought Noddy and Big Ears were going to appear at any time. Anyway, everybody was looking for Hattie. Where's Hattie? Where's Hattie? Anyway, eventually they found Hattie. Somebody had been sitting on it. And they pulled Hattie, and they were addressing this thing like it was an alive object. Poor Hattie, oh, poor Hattie. And then they put it back on his head. And I remember Paul and I thinking, Jesus, this is the guy who's running our country at the moment. Yeah, anyway, that was him.
There was a lot of talk about the amount of alcohol being consumed by the Soameses, and that.
Yeah, they did, Hannes. Anyway, I think Camilla had enough of it, and she wanted to go back to, I can't remember if it was Fothergill. Anyway, she wanted to go back. So whoever was piloting the tender boat, I think it was a police reserve chap, and I went back with her and got to the island, up onto the bank, and I climbed off to hold the prow of the boat. And she had a bikini on, and so now she was climbing off, and of course the bow of the boat was very wet, and she slipped and did the splits as she slid towards me, holding the front. So I got some serious freaking welding arc eye from the view. Yeah. Anyway, I thought, okay, that's something I must jot down in my notebook. Yeah, and then we went back, and I think we were staying in Boomy. They'd set up Boomy for him. The army had set up Boomy for him with this long table outside. It was beautiful, brilliant, man. you know, all the white linen and the crystal and the mess silver. And yeah, Paul and I were there. I think there was one other guy, might have been Rob Nimmer, might have been there. And we sat on that at the end of the table, and they were all drinking wines and whiskies and whatever. And of course, on the other end, we were hoovering the castle beers properly. Yeah, and then that was his trip to shoot buffalo. Yeah, and he had a vehicle specially driven up from Pretoria as well. It was a beautiful vehicle, man, which had all the gizmos on it. I remember, Hannes, Paul and I, my butt was living in Sonoya at the time, and we wanted to go and see him. But Paul said, let's take the governor's car, because he was at house. So we did. He took the governor's car from Salisbury, as it was then, down to Sonoya, and we got to my butt's house, and it had a speaker on the front of the car, you know, so you could address people in front of it, move out the way or whatever. And we got there and turned the speaker on, and we were calling my butt to open the gate. And he didn't know what was going on. He came out and he saw the governor's cab there with his drunken brother in the car that we had brought down to Sonoya.
Stu, were you around when Prince Charles arrived?
I was indeed, yeah. In fact, Paul was moved across to look after him when he was here, yeah. So one of the things he did, he wanted to go into Mazoe to see the foot and mouth free buffalo that were there, which John Condy was running.
Really, yeah.
So he went down there, and John Condy had said to him, "No, these things are tame, and you know this is what you can do with buffalo. You can even ride it. Our guys ride it, ride the buffalo. Come on!" So they got him to ride it, and there was a lot of stamping of feet and gnashing of teeth that he had been allowed to ride a buffalo. Africa's dangerous animal. That put the heir to the throne on a buffalo. Had been riding around in that tower. So yeah, he came out specifically at Independence to lower the flag and
yes,
and hoist the new flag, yeah, at Rafaro.
And Stu, just a bit about Lancaster House. What your duties were there, and what went on,
yeah,
with Carrington.
So Hannes, within our group, we took it in turns if there was external travel. I think there was a couple of South African ones, but everybody got a chance. And then there was the American one, somebody else went. And then Lancaster House came up, and it was my turn. So there was, now the team had been expanded quite considerably then, because there was now Muzarewa, Sitole, Chirao, and they all had security guys, police security guys as well with him, so that the team was a bit bigger. So they sent an advanced team to London, and I was sent in the advanced team. And I think I was the only guy sent. Yeah, I think there might have been an SB guy who I met there. And then the plan was for me to go across and meet our counterparts from the Metropolitan Police. So there was two special branch guys, two detective sergeants, very nice guys who I met. They met me at the airport and took me around and showed where Lancaster House was, the routes they were going to be taken, the vehicles that were going to be used, the hotel where the delegation was going to be staying. And I think when I look at the photograph and count the number of people, I think permanently there was about 30 of us. you still there?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I lost you briefly.
So there was probably about 30 of us in the delegations, from secretaries. There was a couple of ministers. Chris Anderson was there. Rowan Cronje was there. And then there were guys in and out the whole time. So I went across early and stayed we were in Knightsbridge, stayed in Hyde Park Hotel. Luxurious, to say the least. It was great. And that was my base, waiting for the rest of the party to come across, which they eventually did. And one of the other guys flew across with Smith. I think it was Bill McCarthy, came across with him. And then we moved into Knightsbridge, to another hotel, Towers or something. Knightsbridge Towers, one of those. And we had the whole floor was, of course, it was Zimbabwe Rhodesia at the time. That whole floor was for us. And I think Joshua and Corman, Robert Mugabe stayed at Palm Gardens Hotel just down the road. So we stayed there. And we were paid. I honestly, Hannes, I can't believe how much we were paid. We were given an allowance, a daily allowance, which we drew weekly. So we had a sort of bagman, chap named Tim Trafford. He looked after the physical security of everything. They had their own CIO communications room. They had a direct link back to Salisbury. And all the secretaries, they had lots of secretaries, etc. And Tim, he used to run the admin side of it, and then he used to pay us weekly, and you'd get this huge wad of British pounds. And as you know, foreign currency was hard in those days. We couldn't get it. So yeah, we were very well looked after. I mean, obviously accommodation and food and everything was taken care of. So it was spending money. Some of the sensible guys had bank accounts and they saved money. Hannes, I think if I came back with tuppence, with 2 pennies, it was a lot. I spent it. I spent everything. One interesting thing that did happen there, Hannes, was Smith was getting, at one time, maybe as many as 20 letters a day. And he had no administration staff. You know, normally he would have a secretary who would deal with him. And so I used to take them into his room and say, "Sir, you've got these." And he, in the end, he said, "Stu, you read them. Can you reply to them?" I said, "Sir, can I perhaps take on a secretary?" And he said, "No, Stu, you can do it." Which I did. So I replied to every single letter we got in longhand. And eventually it got so much with the other bits and pieces I was doing. I said, "Sir, please, can I get some help?" And at one of the, it was a Rhodesian group, a Rhodesian support group, or Rhodesian society. And there was a couple there, a Welsh couple. And he ran a secretarial business. And he had come out to Rhodesia. He was a supporter of Lions rugby, and he used to follow the Lions around, you know, if they went on tour. And he came to Rhodesia and he loved it. And he said, "No, I'd like to help you." And he had his number one secretary with him, a girl named Johanna. And she said, "Okay, this is what we do." She gave me a dictaphone. He said, "Stu, you go through the letters. Tell me what you want to say in them. Here's your dictaphone. I'll collect the tape from you every day and I'll type them up, bring them back and sign them for you." And that's how we did it. And years later, a friend of mine who actually came to the Prime Minister's office at one time, but he was on leave in the UK and he went to stay with a friend. And this friend said to him, "Hey, I've had a letter from the Prime Minister of Rhodesia, or the ex-Prime Minister of Rhodesia." And she produced it, and he had a look at it. And it was signed off, you know, Stu Michael. And Harry Wood said, "I think you've been bullshitting. This is Stu Michael. He's not the Prime Minister or whatever." Anyway, Harry asked me about him. I said, no, this is what happened. I was, being the PM's secretary. And a letter was written to Prime Minister, to Ian Smith when he got back. Sorry, it started to piss with rain outside now. Started written back to him and said, thank you very much, Mr. Smith. I got a letter from your secretary or whatever, acknowledging whatever. I've still got some of those letters, actually, which I kept. And Smith's secretary at the time said to me, Stuart, well done. You obviously did a good job as a secretary. And then on one occasion, I got a phone call from reception that somebody had come to see the Prime Minister, come to see Ian Smith. I think we were on the 3rd floor. I went down, and there was this gentleman. He must have been in his 60s, maybe a bit older, very well dressed, and he had a box with him. And I said, morning, sir, can I help you? And he said, I just bought this for Mr. Smith, just a card and a little gift for him. And it was a Davy mining lamp. You know, the lamps that miners in Wales, the coal miners used to take into the mines. Mm-hmm. And it had been made into a presentation, and he wanted to give it to Smith, and with a letter. And I said, well, come up and meet him. He said, no. I know he's a very busy man. I said, no, honestly, he'd like to see you. So I came up with him, left him in my room. Mine was opposite Smith's. Knocked on the door, went in, and told Smith what had happened. Sir, I think it might be a nice thing to meet this gentleman. He said, yeah, please bring him in. Let me tell you what, Hannes, this must have made this guy's freaking life. To take him in, and he sat down, and Smith said, would you like some tea? And he stayed, and he had a cup of tea with him, and they had a long jibber jabber. He had come from Llanelli in Wales. Okay. Obviously a mad rugby fan, as Smith was, so they had something in common. Yeah, so he had brought this gift. So I'd say the majority of the letters were letters of support. There was the odd one ranting about him being a racist and so on, but they were very in the minority. And I had a top secret stamp from a gift shop, one of those novelty shops. And the 2 Brit guys I was with, I've no doubt there was other jobs they were told to keep an eye on and do. And I'm quite sure that rooms were bugged. I've no doubt they were. Anyway, so I had this top secret stamp, and I stamped everything. If it was an invitation to a cocktail, I'd stamp top secret, and I'd leave it in the room. So when these Brit guys came in, they'd see top secret and read it. And we'd go to each of the flower bowls, the flower arrangements, and we would talk into them, assuming that it was a James Bond situation and there was a bug in the flowers or the phone. And we would say derogatory things about the royal family, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Just a person.
Yeah. And Muzirewa's delegation, he had taken his brother across as well, Ernest, as his security guy. The police security guy was a chap named Willie Botha, who was with Muzirewa. Anyway, he came to me, and I don't know why or how, and he said, now, Stuart, I heard that you are an expert on bugging and searching for bugs. So I, of course, said, yes, I know how to do it, which, of course, I didn't. I know absolutely no idea, and I don't know where it came from. So at the same novelty shop, I bought ladybirds, plastic spiders, a whole array of things, and I hid them in his room. I actually hid them in Tim Trafford's room as well. And when I came in, I said, Tim, I've come to sweep your room, and I did. And I said, geez, when your room is bugged, and we pulled out all these bugs, and even to Ernest Muzirewa as well. we pulled out all. He said, "Yeah, your room was bugged." Geez, man.
Stu,
Poor old.
were
Sorry,
were you around when John Giles died?
I was, Hannes, and we were all a bit lost as to what had happened. We all thought the worst at the time. Yeah, and he was at the hotel, stayed at the hotel with us. And obviously, he was a very bright guy, and he was very involved in rewriting the Constitution, or the new Constitution. Yeah, and the next thing we were told that one of the members of the delegation had been found dead and he had committed suicide, which everybody found strange. And I think the senior guys in our delegation, the police guys, I don't believe they were allowed access to the body or to the investigation or anything like that. I don't think they were. And there was a lot of them in and out. A lot of SB guys who suddenly arrived and disappeared. Yeah, so perhaps there was something untoward, which we never found out. Yeah.
Stu, it's been very, very interesting.
Cheers, Hannes. Thank you very much. And can I say, Hannes, your initiative, you and John, of doing these podcasts have been great. Been of great interest certainly to me and to a lot of the chaps who I've spoken to. So, geez, well done for that to you and John. Brilliant.
Thanks, Stu. And thanks a lot for your time today. It's been very, very interesting.
Yeah, lekker, Hannes. I really hope you managed to get hold of Milne and he would agree to have a chat to you, because I think there'll be you'll get some amusing stories from him. Yeah,
I'll try and track him down, Stu.
Yeah, no, well, I spoke to him just before you did. Actually, I had a long chat with him, and I said Hannes is going to give you a ring, which he obviously did. So yeah, let's hope he does.
I'll get him.
Yeah, yeah, he got some incidents. Yeah, and he seemed to find landmines and bullets, but bullets from his own guys. But amusing stories anyway.
Cheers, Stu.
Cool, Hannes, stay well, man.